Hi everybody. In this video, I'd like to go over a few of the main points of Stephen Wykstra's The Humean Obstacle to Evidential Arguments from Suffering. Now, this article by Wykstra is fundamentally about providing a critique of William Rowe's article, The Problem of Evil and Some Varieties of Atheism. Wykstra gives a pretty thorough discussion and summary of Rowe's argument in The Problem of Evil paper. And since we have already read that article by Rowe in this course, I'm going to skip some of that summary and some of the more detailed points that Wykstra makes. So before skipping, though, into the sort of meat of what I'd like us to know about Wykstra's arguments, let's review, as Wykstra does, Rowe's argument from evil. Rowe, of course, is arguing, presenting an argument for atheism. And Wykstra is going to be arguing against Rowe's argument. So this is essentially Rowe's arguments. Now, 1 and 2 here are the premises, and 3 is the conclusion. So just reading along here, premise 1 says, there exist instances of intense suffering which an omnipotent, omniscient being could have prevented without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. Premise 2, an omniscient, wholly good being would prevent the occurrence of any intense suffering it could, unless it could not do so without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. And then the conclusion of those two premises, therefore there does not exist an omnipotent, omniscient, wholly good being. Now, premise 2 here, an omniscient, wholly good being would prevent the occurrence of any intense suffering it could, etc., is, as Rowe says, and for our purposes, Wykstra generally agrees, that number 2 is not the contentious premise. That certainly an omniscient, wholly good being could prevent any suffering that it could, unless there was some greater reason not to. So the really contentious premise is number 1. There exists suffering, there exist instances of pointless suffering. Just to kind of shorten it there. So what Wykstra is going to do is to say that there really are no instances of pointless suffering. Rowe, of course, argued that there are instances of pointless suffering. So let's go down here a little bit. We're going to skip a good bit. Okay, support. Move down. Okay, sorry for the, here we go. We're going to be centering, Wykstra is going to be centering a lot of his paper on Rowe's use of appears. Okay. Let's see. Rowe uses the term appears to say that there doesn't appear to be any reason for some suffering. That's why it's important. Because if there doesn't appear to be any overriding reasons for intense suffering, then that would lead us to a rational choice that God does not always have a good reason to, that there is some suffering that God could have stopped, but didn't, and didn't have a good reason to fail to stop it. Okay, so that's the basic idea of appears. All this about appears is good in understanding what is meant by this appears. Okay, so let's go down a little bit more. Okay, cornea. So we're going to start with cornea, okay? Now what we're going to be looking at here are situations where a certain meaning of appears is not met. Now let's look at so just reading here. There may nevertheless be a sound intuition about does not appear claims. Okay, so the idea here is, when are we justified in making claims that something does not appear to be the case? So in the first example, there's a lot of clutter in a garage, and someone says, well, there does not appear to be a table in the room. Okay, well, there's a lot of large clutter in, I say a garage, a very large hangar. Right? I don't know why I thought garage, but a very large hangar, okay, where you put planes. So there's lots of stuff, lots of big stuff, and somebody pokes their head in and says, there doesn't appear to be a table in the room, okay? The second example is with a head cold, you look in the refrigerator and pick out some milk and smell it, and you say, it doesn't appear that the milk is sour, okay? The third example is a professor of ceramics is in a graduate seminar in philosophy. He hears the teacher speaking what sounds like Greek, and he says, it doesn't appear that the sentences have any meaning. So what is going on in these examples? What is Wykstra trying to show? He says, what precisely is the consequence of this condition not being met, a certain condition? It is, one would think, that you are not entitled to make the does not appear claim in question. Okay. In order to reasonably move from it seems no table is present to probably no table is present, Okay, let's go back for a moment. Sorry. You're not able to make a does not appear claim. Like it doesn't appear there's a table in here. It doesn't appear that the milk is sour, etc. You're not able to make a does not appear claim if there is no connection between the evidence and the claim. So he puts it this way. Wykstra calls it, and these kinds of definitions seem a lot harder than they are. He calls it the condition of reasonable epistemic access. And it goes like this: on the basis of a cognized situation S, so S is some situation or other, a human is entitled to claim it appears that P, that some situation obtains, only if it is reasonable for the human to believe that, given her cognitive faculties and the use she has made of them, if P were not the case, S would likely be different than it is, in some way discernible by her. So in order to be able to say the milk is sour, there has to be some reason, there needs to be some connection between, there needs to be some ability of the person, of you, to be able to tell the difference between the presence of the thing or not. So if you had a head cold, you walk up to some milk, you smell it, would you know the difference? And with a head cold, presumably you would not, because the sense of smell is all changed. If you looked into a large hanger full of stuff, presumably you would not know the difference between there being a table in the room or not. So you're not entitled to make the claim that it appears there's no table in the room, or it appears that the milk is sour. Now this will become more, even more clear as we go on, I hope. Okay. So there's a third clause that comes along with what he calls cornea. And again, cornea is the condition of reasonable epistemic access. Epistemic, anything that's epistemic is a part of epistemology. And an episteme, E-P-I-S-T-E-M-E, is from the Greek to mean to know. So it's knowledge. It always has to do with knowledge. So the condition of reasonable epistemic access would be something like, what's the condition for access to knowledge, to reasonable access to knowledge? And cornea, for short, that's what it, condition of reasonable, I'm not sure where the N comes in. Condition of reasonable, I guess RN is supposed to be reasonable epistemic access. Okay, the condition is that one can only make the claim it appears that P if it is reasonable to believe that one could tell the difference between something being the case and something not being the case. Of course, the way this is going to be used, to sort of cut to the chase a little bit, is Rowe argues that in his paper on atheism, and according to that argument from evil, that it appears that there are no good reasons for God to let evil happen in the world, right? And Wykstra is going to argue that Rowe is not entitled to say that it doesn't appear that there are no good reasons, because humans would not be able to tell what God's reasons are, God being so far advanced from humans. So just like a person looking at a huge warehouse full of stuff and erroneously, or not erroneously, but not entitled, isn't, someone looking into a huge warehouse full of stuff, glancing in and not being entitled to claim it doesn't appear there's a table in there, which seems to, the reason that he gives this condition is it's a kind of a logical condition based on how we use language. When we say it doesn't appear that the milk is sour, what we usually mean is that what we usually assume is that someone saying that would know the difference, right, between sour and not sour. So for Roe to say it doesn't appear that there are good reasons for God to fail to stop evil, similarly, Wykstra argues that humans couldn't know if there were good reasons or not. And so they can't say, well, it doesn't appear that there are any good reasons. So he gives some more examples here, or he gives, let's say, what he calls the third clause. Cornea presupposes the third clause. The third one is that I take there to be an evidential connection between what I am inclined to believe and the cognized situation that inclines me to believe it. Okay. To illustrate the difference made by adding 3, imagine a man Mort who is inclined to believe this woman hates me, of any woman who in conversing with him does not constantly smile. Suppose further that Mort has, through psychoanalysis, become fully conscious that this belief-forming disposition is completely unreliable. Skip down. On Swinburne's explication of appears, it would be correct for Mort to assert this woman appears to hate me. Right? Because if you think of the sense of appears, like it seems to me that this woman hates me. For both of Swinburne's conditions, and you can read those later, are met. On my amended explication, the appears claim would no longer be correct, for Mort no longer takes there to be an evidential connection between the woman's behavior and what he believes. The reason that there's no evidential connection is because he doesn't have a reasonable belief that he would know the difference between whether the woman hates him or not, because he has this disposition to think that women hate him who don't smile, but he also knows that he has that this belief disposition is unreliable because of his psychological testing and his knowledge. Okay. So let's jump to 156. Let's see. Okay. Here. For an instance of suffering, the good and the suffering it serves must be connected in an especially intimate way. Oh, let me back up a little bit. For an outweighing good, this is Roe speaking, for an outweighing good to provide a God-justifying purpose, right? A reason for God to go ahead and let evil happen because there is a purpose above and beyond that we can't see. For an outweighing good to provide a God-justifying purpose. For an instance of suffering, the good and the suffering it serves must be connected in an especially intimate way. So this means that the for instance, you recall that there was a example Rowe gave that also Wykstra mentions of a fawn in the forest, a baby deer in the forest that is near a tree that gets hit by lightning, something like that, and the deer dies a very slow, horrible death. And Rowe asks, there isn't any, it doesn't appear that there's any overriding good that allowing this evil serves, that there doesn't seem to be a reason for this this suffering. Remember, in the argument from evil, or the problem of evil, all that's meant by evil really is suffering, right, for humans and non-human animals. That's what's meant by evil. So this connection between the evil and the good, that is an overriding reason for God to allow the suffering. Wykstra calls this the intimate connection consideration. Okay, I'm going to let you read on that on your own for some more of that. And let's look at page 159. Okay. He says, the linchpin of my critique has been that if theism is true, this is just what one would expect. For if we think carefully about the sort of being theism proposes for our belief, like the sort of God that theism proposes, it is entirely expectable, given what we know of our cognitive limits, that the goods by virtue of which this being allows known suffering should very often be beyond our ken or our ability to understand it. That's the basics of Wykstra's article. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. I hope that this short video has given you some insight as to how Wykstra critiques Rowe's argument for atheism from the problem of evil. Thank you for your time and your attention. Bye-bye.